What's going on, world? Peace and blessings, and welcome back to Well Connected. Appreciate you tuning in this week. Got a dope episode in store, so let's get into it. Well, it's that time of the year, election season, especially from your local election standpoint. Make sure you go out and vote. Very important. Local elections honestly might be even more important, have a direct impact in your life, even more than federal elections. All elections are important, but especially local elections. So make sure you be aware of who's running for your offices, the various different roles that are open up right now, and go out and cast your vote. So with that being said, it's going to be a caveat to today's episode. And today I want to talk about the importance of the black vote. I feel that oftentimes the black vote is a very important element of this country, especially the black community. However, I feel that our vote sometimes is taken for granted, does not come with tangible policy, does not come with tangible legislation, and sometimes our vote is often given due to some maybe fear mongering, some gaslighting, straw man arguments. So today I want to talk about the importance of the black vote and how the black vote can oftentimes be exploited, and how we can look out for those elements and make sure that our voice is being heard. All right, bet. So let's first hop into it, right? Historically in this country, an importance of voting. Oftentimes the older generation will lament to the younger generation about the importance of voting, how our ancestors fought for this, sacrificed for this, and why we must go out and vote. And conceptually speaking, that is very true. However, it's very important that we must understand the overall qualitative element about how we got to this point and why voting is important, but also why voting for tangible policy is even more important. So collective in our country, as we know, for Black Americans, unfortunately, we were brought here during slavery, and for a large first 100 plus 50 years of this country, we were just 3/5 of a human being and not considered actual citizens or even people at that point. As we fast forward, we get to a point where after the 13th Amendment, which went ahead and freed the slaves, quote unquote, the 15th Amendment is passed. And the 15th Amendment, which finally gave the right to vote to essentially black men in this country, or all other non-white men in the country at the time. So that happened, okay? 1870, okay? This is when the 15th Amendment is finally passed. All right, so at the time, it seems that, okay, finally we made some strides in this country, and black people can finally go out and vote. Again, black men. But however, it wasn't that simple. So for starters, I want to stride by saying that with the black community, although at the time when the 15th Amendment was passed and though only black men were allowed to vote, the black community always worked in conjunction with the rest of the community, especially with our women as well too. We pulled together our vote. And so when we did go out and vote, it was still done from a collective standpoint. Women still were involved in decision making within the black community of giving their input. Of course, during those times, yes, there are gender roles and things. Of course, not what they should be today. And of course, misogyny and patriarchy, all those things existed. However, it's very important to understand that the black community was a little different though, because we were coming out of slavery and coming out of this negative, traumatic experiences. The black community was very much bonded together, especially from a family perspective. So when we were given the opportunity to vote, it was looked at as an actual community vote. Even though black men were given the right to vote, it actually benefited black women for what happened and what moved forward. So again, I think it's very important to establish that during that time, it was a community vote oftentimes. And so it was not necessarily the same divisiveness that eventually we see within the suffrage movement, which would come forward. So 1870, we get the right to vote. However, as we know, white supremacy and racism in this country, things are always going to have loopholes to them. And that's why it's very important when some people say, well, you got the right to vote in 1870, everything was good. Well, no. There were still many loopholes and things and barriers put in place to negate against black Americans voting, especially in the South, right? A place where slavery had just been abolished, right? So these things included poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, grandfather clauses. So what does that mean, right? So federally, yes, right to vote was passed. However, state-wise and state laws don't always necessarily adhere to federal laws. So especially after Reconstruction, okay? Immediately Reconstruction, we did go ahead and black people actually were elected. We voted right away. 2 black men were elected in the Senate. However, once the Union federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877, we saw a big decrease, especially how this voting element worked. And so, again, going back to a lot of negative elements they put in place to hinder black people from voting. Because, again, federally, yes, you have to allow black men to vote. However, again, talking about literacy tests, right? Polling taxes. Well, at the time it was coming out of slavery, black people don't have financial capital like that. So they make a tax that you have to pay to vote. As we knew, that would absolutely negatively impact black American citizens, as we don't have any money or barely any money at that time. And so that was a big way to hinder us from voting. Then there was a literacy test. Again, that made some type of way where you had to prove you could read a certain level to go and cast your vote. Well, there were also many rules and literally laws against black people from reading for hundreds of years in this country, and especially post-slavery. Not a lot of black Americans might have been efficient in reading and literacy at that time, again, because of white supremacy and racism. But again, we weren't given an opportunity, and so therefore, if you can't read, you can't vote, right? The grandfather clause, which is kind of crazy to learn about. And this loophole was really deterrent, that essentially if you were born before 1870, when voting was still illegal for black Americans to do, however, they in the South would say that, well, if you were legal to vote then, you were still illegal to vote now, even though you federally are allowed to vote. But the state law would say that because you were a slave at the time or you were illegal to vote, therefore the grandfather clause does not allow a free black American to vote. This was passed in many state and federal, local and state legislation and policy, especially in the South. We saw this, and so this was a big deterrent. So again, yes, 1870 came. Yes, we got the 15th Amendment, which technically on paper allows to vote. However, in the South and especially across the country, you saw there are a large amount of limitations against black people from voting, especially in intimidation again as well. That many people will just actually threaten people with physical violence and threat to their life if they went out and voted. So again, we got the right to vote, or we truly didn't get the right to vote. Okay, and especially again, remember this time as well, there's still a large amount of black population in the South. Yes, we did have this North migration, and part of it was part of the voting laws went along with that. However, things weren't all clear. And at the same time as well, our black women could not vote either. So it's still, even though, yes, I said before, the collective black community did go ahead and pull our vote, we still did not have all our members voting, right? And that's a very important piece to highlight. Now, as we talk about voting in our country, though, right, it's very interesting because, yes, black women were given the right to vote in 1870, but however, women in this country still were not given the right to vote. And that's what we saw with the 19th Amendment in 1920. We saw that gave essentially white women the right to vote, right? And that was a lot during the suffrage movement and giving women the voice. Very important time, right? Because voting is an important element. However, it's important to point out that that did not give black women the right to vote. Again, although the 19th Amendment gave white women the right to vote, black women were not given that right to vote. Historically, I think it's very important to understand that certain battles always will have a race element to them. Even when gender might be a common purpose, it does not mean, and unfortunately, like many times in this country, black women are not spoken up for, or black women are not fought for. So in that time, we still had lots of strides to make. Again, with all the various different negating factors to try to limit black people from voting, again, with these poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, the grandfather clause, and all these negative elements, right? And again, we're still not having a true equality, right? We had to keep fighting and working for this opportunity to vote because we needed representation, okay? And so essentially, we had to keep fighting for this. And this we saw with great civil rights leaders from, Martin Luther King to all these various different people, and especially the voting blocks they put together, because it was important for us to lobby and have the opportunity. So we first saw change with the 24th Amendment in 1964, which essentially took away from all these different legal barriers, such as the literacy tests and the polling taxes, intimidation factors, grandfather clauses. At least federal legally said you couldn't even the state level use those anymore, right? So that was a good stretch. However, there's still a barrier in place. And again, not everybody could vote. And finally, with the 1965 Voting Rights Act, this essentially let opportunity for all American citizens, regardless of your gender or race, would have opportunity to vote. And this is essentially the time when black women got the right to vote. So black women didn't get the right to vote until about 1965, collectively at that point in time. But as well, collectively, all black people truly got the right to vote in 1965 as well with the Voting Rights Act. And essentially, it took away all the other barriers and limitations which had been strafing the black community. Okay, so put that in perspective, right? I mean, this was not a long time ago, right? So we're talking about 58 years ago, okay, that black people pretty much collectively been voting freely in this country, which it's very young, okay? So with that being said, right, that was a point in time. So we fast forward, right, for the last 58 plus years, okay? And of course, Black Americans have made substantial strides in socioeconomic progress in our country in various bits and pieces, right? And especially have representation, because voting happened, right? And voting did matter, and voting did change and help things. All right. So here we are today, 2023. And you think about that voting block, okay? Again, 58 plus years. So if you're older than 58 years old, you remember a time when Black Americans truly couldn't freely vote as we could nowadays. And in fact, if you're just a little younger than 58, but your parents were directly raised in that time, you know about that as well too. So those memories and things don't go away, right? Just as much as, in 1965 when that Voting Rights Act came, it wasn't utopia. People were still harassed and looked at, and a lot of limitations they still to this day do. Okay, that's why we see certain things about voting ID laws and different elements. These are still just residual effects of mechanisms to try to limit Black voting and the vote suppression element. So in 2023, it's still just important to vote. However, again, there has been lots of strides in our country and progress that needs to be acknowledged. And I think, a huge stride was obviously 2008 with President Barack Obama becoming president, right? The first Black president. And that was huge, okay? That was a big, substantial movement, and especially relatively in a short period of time for us getting the right to vote to now have our first Black president. So I think it's very indicative of how far we've come and the progress we made. So we had 8 years of President Obama. And at that time, we saw almost record voting turnout for the Black community. First Black president. All right. Obama's term ended. So this past 8 years, right, from 2016 to kind of where we're at now as collective, I feel that this has been really increased amount of narratives to get Black people to vote. This is where I see a lot of the fear mongering, the gaslighting, and the strawman arguments have really come into place, and to get Black people to vote. Because for years, the Democratic Party didn't have to work too hard for the Black vote, especially during Obama years, because again, it's the first Black president. So Black people naturally is going to vote for the Black person. Honestly, it didn't matter that President Obama didn't have tangible policy for the Black community. Black people still voted in high numbers. That's the reality. Now, with that being said, right, because of that, the problem came in 2016 and past 2020 election was that, okay, you don't have a Black candidate anymore. That's all you ran on. So now you talk about why vote for the Democratic side, which again, primarily Black people voted for the past almost 60 plus years. And again, the reality is, and this is where myself as an independent perspective come into place. Although, yes, of course, Democratic Party has been a home for the Black community, politically speaking. And of course, the Democratic Party does give the platform for individuals. We see most elected officials are Black or Democrats, and so they do have support. They may have money, resources, right, given to these individual Black officials we have, right? And also, of course, from an optics perspective, between the Republican Party and Democratic Party, there does seem to be a culture difference. The Republican Party has never tried any true organic outreach to benefit and reach the Black community. And in fact, there are many people in the Republican Party that may be outward really and are racist and support white supremacist agendas, or maybe have a lot of rhetoric and narratives and commentary which do not align within the Black community. And in fact, there are many Black conservatives who oftentimes have different rhetoric and narratives that go against the Black community and may talk down against the Black community. So with that being said, I'm not naive. That's why I will never say the Democrat Plantation, because somehow that implies that a Republican Party is not a plantation or somehow any better. So we have to establish that. And so with that being said, right, because of the Republican Party and conservatives, people on the right, or because those negative elements or these different racial divisive elements are highlighted, it's very easy for Black people to say, well, vote Democrat, because, well, what's the alternative? Voting for them? I get it. However, there is some flaw in that logic. So this is what I talk about again with the fear-mongering and gaslighting element. So again, because many 58 plus years old as a country, and especially the Black American, you remember a time when black Americans could not go out and vote. You remember a time where segregation existed. You remember a time where there was so much racial tension in our country. That does not go away. And so the importance of voting, I think, subconsciously is always going to be there because of what happened and what you experienced and what you happened. But today's generation, because those sacrifices, do not have those same experiences, do not have the same negative shared experiences of racial tension and racial divisiveness in our country and the opportunities. So for us, going out and voting, just because someone said go vote for them, well, why should I? And this is where I say I think the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, quite frankly, will use both different levels of gaslighting and fear-mongering to get people to go vote for them, right? Now, regardless of race, I think that is gaslighting and fear-mongering and strawman arguments, I think, are used divisiveness across all races in this country, especially when it comes to voting, right? And when I talk about strawman arguments, essentially we take one narrative and you make an extreme out of it, right? And then you go ahead and essentially generalize all elements under that extreme. So for example, I know one thing was really popular, or a narrative that was pushed in 2016 and 2020, right, was that if Donald Trump was elected president, that slavery and Jim Crow would be brought back to this country, right? Because there were definitely, some very extreme people on the right. And historically, like white supremacists and racists have voted Republican. Not saying racists and white supremacists, they vote Democrat too. Openly, they vote Republican. Okay, like KKK, people like that and things, right? And a lot of people like that, right? There were a lot of people who might have been Trump supporters, right? Who were very openly, maybe racist or had a lot of racial rhetoric to them. So those people exist for sure, right? But I personally don't think that resonates the entire voting bloc that were Republicans or conservatives or voted for Trump. But we'll take those people, okay, and we can generalize it and say, well, if Trump was elected, that those type of people, right, would overtake the country, and that would be the narrative that would rise up. And I understand emotions are involved, especially the past couple of years, the racial elements to it as well. But there has been a lot of divisiveness and fear, I think, because what we've seen with Black Lives Matters and how there has been a contrast in how our lives are viewed. But we'll take up an argument and we'll say, well, if those MAGA extremists get a hold of the country and then black people are going back into slavery, we're going back into Jim Crow. And I think what happens is that it's disingenuous because that's not going to happen. It's 2023. In fact, it's disrespectful to our ancestors and all the work, that policy and legislation that we fought for in this country. We will never regress back to that. And I think, quite frankly, to get people even thinking that that's a possibility is wrong. Because what it does, it gaslights you. It makes you say, well, man, we can't let them win, so we have to go vote for the Democrats. Or go vote for the person that I'm pushing out here. Vice versa, you see gaslighting and fear-mongering and strawman arguments. The right does it all the time. They'll take maybe some liberals and progressives, right, may have really extreme leftist views, right, and want to tear down the government and maybe structure things, right? You look at Antifa or look at some of these people, or you have certain views about things being pushed to our children or certain rhetoric. I don't think those people, quite frankly, those extremists represent all the left, the liberals, progressive, Democrats, okay? But in reality, there are some, sure. And I think at times they get personified and generalized as well. If you vote Democrat or you vote the left, that means you support all that controversial or divisiveness behavior and that the libs and left are going to take over the country and burn it down. Quite frankly, I don't think that either. Because again, like we have a country, like it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. I know you may say, well, January 6th. Those extremists. Sure. And now a whole different podcast I'll get into. But I personally do not think our country was at stake. I personally do not think our country was going to be overtook. I personally don't think it was a legitimate coup happen. Terrible day. Anybody enter the Capitol should be tried. Felonies, treasonous behavior. Anybody that entered the Capitol. I don't care if you just walk through, you're innocent, you illegally entered a federal building. Can't happen. Okay? Can't happen. So that was a bad look. And I do absolutely agree and understand why some people might say again, hey, if we don't vote, look what will happen. But part of that, again, this time, this country, when emotions are attached, when you have a certain narrative and you want to see a certain way, yeah, those things are going to be very, very triggering and can support those agendas. But the problem and issue is for the black community is that we need tangible policy. We have a lot of surrogates in the black community who are oftentimes entertainers, celebrities, athletes, musicians, and this is who we use to get the black people to vote. Happens every year. Malcolm X talked about this decades ago.
They called leaders. This included Lena Horne. This included Dick Gregory. And this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community, and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear.
This is nothing new. However, it is up to us to understand that this isn't policy. And I think what happens sometimes is that when someone in the black community, and because of, again, some of the parts I mentioned in the overall support for the black community and voting Democrat, historical components to it, it's typically right when someone does have a narrative that's not for the Democrats, okay, they oftentimes are trying to push people towards the right. You look at someone like Candace Owens, okay, and her whole thing is a Democrat plantation, but her solution is voting Republican. It's not highlighting or recognizing the various different issues and problems in the black community. It's more of a, well, that's them plantation, and voting them and voting Republican will automatically fix your problems. And it's ironic because it's like an opposite narrative that Democrats push, is that, well, not voting Republican automatically will fix the black people's problems in some sense, right? And that's not the case. And I think it's important we can understand that. We can criticize and critique the Democratic Party and also critique and criticize the Republican Party. It is possible. So again, it goes back to these narratives push. For myself, I saw that in the past 2016, 2020 election, is that, you know, if you have any critique of the Democratic candidate, especially I saw in 2020, if you critique Joe Biden or his white supremacist history or racism, I was automatically met with, say you're voting for Trump. And again, because of the straw man arguments, right? And this quote unquote lesser of evil, the narrative on the left was that the right in the Republicans and Trump is the boogeyman. So therefore, you need to vote our side to stop the bad guys, if you will. Right. And I'm just not buying that. The reality is a lot of people really got politically aware, I think, in 2016. It was a jolt. You know, I think a lot of people were cruise control Obama years. And of course, once this contrast from President Obama to Trump, it was huge, right? It was something that just caught people off guard. And maybe people start paying attention to what was happening in politics, at least from a mainstream perspective point of view, right? And the reality is, and for myself, I saw a very eye-opening time was that, you know, I didn't fall asleep during Obama years. And it was amazing when I saw things that part of the President Obama administration, and then seeing Trump take the blame for some of the same things. And when I say that, it's not a lot, but you also got to understand a lot of American policies that happen, especially like the kids in cages. Okay. I will start by saying I don't take any joy or pride in that. I think it sucks. It's inhumane. Okay. It doesn't happen when illegal immigrants are put in these detainment centers. But that's something that was, you know, started under ICE with George Bush, and some of the Obama administration pushed even more. It's something that President Trump continued. But I remember when people first saw those images of kids in cages, it was very personified and said, oh my gosh, I can't believe Trump is doing this. What's happening here? And then for myself, it was like, well, you knew what happened just for the past several years has been happening. And I remember talking to a very, very respected member of my family. Very, very intelligent person. And they said, I mentioned that, well, you know what's happened in Obama administration? They said, quote, well, I would have heard about that then. And that was very telling to me. And I realized that in the black community, it's like one of those things that if a tree falls in the forest, it doesn't make a sound. So like just because if someone doesn't talk about a negative element of the Democratic Party or a negative element about a politician or a certain talking point, doesn't matter. Did it happen? Well, yes, it did happen. And again, we need to understand that demanding tangible policy, that reality is the Democratic Party knows they don't actually really truly have to work for our vote. Hence why they send all these surrogates out. All they gotta do is dance for us or have someone who's cool co-sign us. And again, I think we need to move past as the black community as a maturity standpoint, understand as well that just because, like, it's like if a black celebrity entertainer comes out and says vote Democrat or vote Joe Biden, then it's cool. They're verticulture. But they come out and say vote for Trump, then automatically they're a coon or a sellout or don't know what they're talking about. And it's like we got to stop that behavior because, quite frankly, neither of them may really politically know what's going on. But this notion that one is used and the other is organically out there, I was like, well, no. The black person who's a celebrity who's endorsing a Democrat candidate is way more likely to have been exploited because they're being used specifically to get black people to vote without any policy. Because here's the reality. They wouldn't need a black celebrity to tell them to vote for them. Tom Strayer had Juvenile before him back that ass up with him. You know why? Because Tom Strayer didn't have any tangible policy for the black community. So he had to stoop low and think this all it takes to get us to vote. Saucy Santana and Trina. No vote, no vucking. Had a whole music video about why if you don't go vote when we're not going to give them that up. It was just deviant twerking behavior. This is tangible. That's not exploitation? Really? That's serious stuff happening here? Cardi B saying with Bernie Sanders? Is Cardi B, in all respect, not saying that she can't know civics or have understanding, but she's not black, nor does she have understanding of historical elements of the black community or legislation or policy. Let's get real for ourselves. Let's stop that. Okay? And be fair, vice versa, I really don't want to hear a black celebrity tell me to vote for Trump either, because I'm not going to look at them and say, well, just because he's told me to go for Trump or Walker Flocka says endorses, I'm going to do it. No. Okay? But we need to understand, we understand there's a difference. In terms of, it's the same. So a black person openly endorsing a Democratic candidate or celebrity is no different than a black person endorsing a Republican Party candidate. The difference is we think culturally one cares, but if neither has policy, neither has policy. Okay. And there's that part we need to talk about. Hence why I saw with Ice Cube in 2020 election cycle, where he came with a tangible policy for black community. He asked for a meeting with both Democrats and Joe Biden and Republicans and Donald Trump. Okay? Democrats, Joe Biden told him, we'll talk after the election. Donald Trump, Republicans took a meeting. Donald Trump, Republicans came up with an actual tangible policy, the Platinum Plan. Now, does that mean that that plan was actually going to go in place and legislation will get passed? I don't know. Okay, because a lot of politicians say things, right? And so I'm not going to be like, well, automatically, that means we automatically have to vote for Trump just because, you know, he said he had a plan. But, so I get that. But the problem was I didn't like was that he went to both parties. He wasn't some MAGA supporter and just said, I'm down for vote for Trump. Okay, he didn't pull a Kanye, put the MAGA hat on, all that. He went to both parties. One party ignored him and didn't respect him to take a meeting. The other party, who was the incumbent president of the United States of America, said, I'll take a meeting. Let's see what's happening for the black community. But the way he was demonized and made fun of, it's like this is the part where we have more political maturity. Most black celebrities and entertainers are paid by the Democratic Party. They're surrogates. They're not organically out here speaking on the betterment of the black community. They don't do their own tangible legislation in research. Now, just because you're a celebrity entertainer doesn't mean that you can't speak on policy. No, anybody can, of course. No different than I can. But you're being paid to do it because that's the only time you pop out ever And that's the thing with most of these entertainers is that you look at their track record consistently, they don't talk about these issues and topics. And that's the problem issue at hand. And the way that Ice Cube was demonized and SNL did a skit on it and having a MAGA hat on him with Kenan Thompson is racist. Just because, again, this is what black people understand. Like, we allow racism to happen as long as like it's supported the Democrats. Like, it's like, well, as long as that person goes against my narrative, it's okay to be racist against them, right? So if a black person votes Republican or a black person has a narrative that's conservative or talking points, therefore it's okay to be racist. Like, white liberals and progressives will attack black people in a heartbeat if you do not share the same political ideology as them. The reality is both the Republican Party champions themselves as free speech and the Democratic Party champions themselves as inclusivity. The reality is neither side really agree with black people that don't think like them. If a black person doesn't think conservative or it blames the Republican Party, then it's like, wow, you're on a Dem plantation. You need to leave and think on your own. And then if vice versa, if a black person doesn't want to think or vote Democrat or challenge liberal ideology or progressiveness in some way, and it's, well, just say vote for Trump or you're a sellout. It's like, well, no. Neither of those elements are true. Neither party is a true flagship of the black community. And it's like, I saw it's funny, you know, with these entertainers, celebrities, and exploitations of vote. Like, I look at someone like Sexy Red. Okay, entertainer, Sexy's doing her thing out here. Sexy has a lot of, you know, I would say degenerate behavior in terms of the subject matter and things that she promotes and talks about. It's all hypersexualized. Nothing positive, quite frankly, to benefit the black community behind it. But that's most rap music. So I'm not going to sit here and isolate her. Okay? And she's a grown adult who can talk about whatever she want to talk about. All right, so I'm not hating on Sexy, but I'm going to point the fact that most of the music is degenerate music. Now, all that's okay with the black community, right? Her promoting deviancy is cool. Hypersexualized behavior. A-okay. Twerking and all this objectively hypersexualized things is fine. However, when Sexy Red came out and said, I support Trump, the hood, you know, fools with Trump, suddenly she was turned on. Then she was attacked and judged. Why are we listening to her? And saying, why does Sexy Red have an opinion on these things? And it's ironic, was like, yo, she can promote all this deviant behavior that draws divisiveness and corrupts our children. Hey, okay, but just have a deferring political ideology viewed, and suddenly now we're canceled. Like, and it's funny because like that take she had is literally the same take that most black entertainers have for a Democrat. It's kind of low ball, low standard take, if you will, right? But again, it's about the viewpoint. How she came out and said, I fooled Joe Biden, and she's been celebrated. And that's the part where it does get frustrating, because you understand, like, we're being utilized for this, right? Like, the black community doesn't have much representation, where, like, if a black person votes Republican or has a black conservative standpoints, they're not automatically a sellout raccoon, because it implies that somehow, some way, as long as you vote Democrat, that you're not going to sell yourself out. There are many black politicians that have sold out the black community. There are many black politicians that, quite frankly, from my ideology standpoint, are really no different from a lot of black conservatives, because policy-wise, you're not doing anything different. You're not doing anything for the black community. So I think individually, I think there are a lot of black politicians who do want to help the black community. But collectively, right, the Democratic Party as his corporate entity isn't really too far off from the Republican Party. And so, again, when someone says, well, what am I supposed to do? Not vote? Look, I say that our ancestors fought and sacrificed for us to have the right to choose to vote. Like, your local election is very important. You should always vote in your local election. There's so many seats are just run unopposed every year. 75% of DAs, district attorneys, the ones who don't prosecute police officers and people like that when they kill innocent people, run unopposed every year. Yeah, those are very important. But a federal election, that's what people pay attention to. So when someone gaslights and says, hey, if you don't vote this election, don't be mad when slavery comes back. Stop. You can vote for a third party. I know that may not be popular to hear, especially with this hyperly partisan two-party viewers and voting block we have, but you can vote third party. I know people will gaslight you and shame you for voting third party and tell you all the reasons in the world why your vote for another person is wrong. You must vote for my candidate, and the whole world will fall apart. It's the same cycle every year. Every cycle, this is the most important election yet, which may be the case in some capacity, but quite frankly, from a federal level, oftentimes things aren't going to dramatically change that much. I understand that, of course, there's things on the ballot in federal election that's coming up this year that are very important, right? And there's a lot of issues that could shape the country. So yes, but at the same time, we also have to demand tangible policy. We must understand that our vote cannot just be easily exploited. We have to be consistent. I think the reason why the Republican Party does so terribly is that, again, there's no organic outreach. And in fact, many black conservatives, they'll call all the problems and issues that happen in the black community, but never provide any solutions. In fact, they think that all these issues and problems are exclusively black people's fault. They never recognize or acknowledge the legislation and policy that has been put in place oftentimes that has created an environment that has negatively impacted the black community. And their automatic solution is, well, just vote Republican. It's not going to turn people on. It's not going to bring people to the party. In fact, when you talk down to us and you shame us, you're inconsistent. And that's a big part of being on key. You know, again, I think it's important to talk about the talking points, right? You know, the Republican Party, especially with some of the divisiveness, and I would say for the, we see it happening here with, you know, Ron DeSantis in Florida, and with revisionist history and history books, right? And trying to reframe slavery as some type of benefit to black Americans. We had trade out of that somehow in skills. No, it's a horrific, devilish, satanic time. Let's call it what it is. There's nothing positive came out of that. And Texas are trying this as well too in different parts. It is important to call that out. It is very important to vote against those people who are trying to change objective American history. However, sometimes with the fear mongering is that, look, that's happening in those states, but those are state laws. So again, sometimes the fear monger will say, well, because what's happening around DeSantis in Florida, if you don't go out and vote for my politician here in Pennsylvania, the same thing will happen. And it's like, well, no, that's not necessarily the case. Or we generalize, well, look, the Republican Party are doing there in one individual state. If you don't go vote Joe Biden, that's going to happen to all across America. No, that's part of the kind of gaslighting part as well, is taking those, again, the strawman arguments, taking the extreme or taking one individual, right, and generalizing it for the rest of the rhetoric. It's tough to watch, don't get it wrong, right? But again, I think it's part of the how we get striped into it. And so if a black person tells you, well, what are you going to do? Not vote? I mean, yes, yeah, why not? It's your choice. It's not popular to hear that, I get that, but you know there's a choice. Voting for a racist or voting for someone who doesn't have legislation or policy for the sake of voting is not productive. It's not powerful. I don't think that's what our ancestors would want us to do. Again, it's very dangerous because I see a lot of the older black generation, with all love, respect, everything they've done, sometimes they can be very subservient, I think, in not demanding anything for their vote. And because of what they've experienced in this country, I can't knock them when I understand it. Hell, I will push back. We're the new voting bloc. Okay? So all those old school fear-mongering tactics and talking points are not going to work nowadays. And I think it's important for us as well to understand that black people can freely think and freely vote for who they want to vote for, but as long as their policy or something that you align with. Again, when I say policy, I don't expect a black person to have to vote for only black policy. No, as Americans and as people, there's policy and things that impact us all, regardless of our race and religion and ethnicity, right? So vote for whatever policy that you adhere to, right? Or maybe follows your element. And that's very important and key, right? But at the same time as well, understand as well that we need to understand that white supremacy and racism is a bipartisan product. And so we need to have policy on both sides. We need to come to both sides of the table. Because it's a negotiation tactic, right? It's like in free agency, right? Where a player who's in free agency will say, hey, I get this contract, big contract off from another team. In reality, it's a negotiation tactic to get more money from the other team they really want to go to, right? For the black community, even if we sit down with the Republican Party, you may not actually want to follow through and get in bed these politicians, right? But if you actually start talking with them and there's actually a possibility that they may listen and want to actually take some votes from black people, that's how you get the fire in the Democratic Party. Like, okay, you know what? Let's actually listen to you. Because the reality is, the Democratic Party knows they don't have to do anything at all to get the black vote. And so, I think for us coming to grips with that and understanding that this is a very important time. right now. Local elections are critical, but national elections and federal elections, of course, have lots of power and weight. But don't be exploited. If a black person supports a Democratic candidate, that does not mean they're automatically for the culture, and vice versa. If someone supports a Republican, conservative candidate, does not mean they're automatically a sellout or coon. Doesn't mean for the culture either, right? However, we have to separate the two. We have to stop seeing it as two dramatically different instances, because reality is you're probably voting for a certain person someone told you to, or a certain celebrity or entertainer influenced you to. Do your own research. But again, as well, have a backbone. It's a new day and age in America. And we appreciate all the sacrifices that the older black generation has done for us. But we don't have to live in that same fear. I'm not going to cry over a racist white man being elected president. Like I saw Roland Martin crying over Joe Biden. I did take a shot just now, but I needed to. Like in Van Jones, people like that crying. Black men crying. And the last caveat I say, what takes my next podcast episode, is I have never voted Republican. I have never voted for Donald Trump. I'll never vote for Donald Trump. I denounce the Republican Party. And I can still say objectively, Joe Biden has passed legislation, policy, intangible negative elements to the black community more than anything Donald Trump has ever done. Joe Biden has passed more negative white supremacist, racist policy and legislation more than anything hurtful than Donald Trump's ever done to the black community. Does that mean I need to vote for Donald Trump? No. But I will acknowledge that about our current sitting president. I know a lot of people have blinders on because of he was a President Obama's VP, and a lot of people don't challenge that. But that happened, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode about exploitation of the black vote. And I stand on that as well, too. Very strongly, I do. So, again, collective overall, the black vote is very important. We've been doing this for about 58 plus years. So don't just waste it. At the same time, don't just vote to vote. Let's demand policy, legislation. Don't be afraid to vote third party if you need to as well. Cornel West is running right now for independent party. Dr. Cornel West. There's other people out here. Do your research. And don't be caught up in fear-mongering and gaslighting. They'll tell black people slavery's going to come back if Donald Trump Republicans get elected. It's not. Demand policy. Demand legislation. Don't just assume that voting Democrat automatically you're ethically and morally voting better. Look who you're voting for. And that's the biggest thing I ask for the black community to do. Don't be exploited. Give our value, vote our value and attention it deserves. With that being said, I appreciate you tuning in today. Make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode coming soon. Get out and vote in your local elections. Stay hip, stay blessed, stay connected.